The views and opinions expressed in the following program are those of the hosts and guests, and not necessarily those of the staff or management of Worldwide Digital Broadcasting Corporation.
Knowledge is power, and this is powerful stuff. Wellness Education Cannabis Advocates of Nevada present the We Can 702 Nevada Cannabis News Hour with the We Can radio team. For the next 60 minutes, we'll take an in-depth look at the cannabis reform revolution sweeping the nation. Now, let's fire up the news hour. Here is the We Can radio team.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the Cannabis News Hour. I'm your host, Michael McAuliffe, bringing you all the latest news in the cannabis world around us. Boy, this has been a busy time since the last time we spoke with you. I can't believe how much news is happening. The rate of change in the marijuana reform movement is just going ballistic at this point, and so it's always a tough thing to choose what to tell you guys about. But I try to pick things that I think are important to you. And let's start off this week with a local story out of the Nevada Independent that was published on February 10th, just a few days ago. And the article by Megan Mesherly and Michelle Rindels is that Supreme Court reminds Nevada lawyers that feds still ban marijuana use. And the article begins saying that the Nevada Supreme Court reminded lawyers today that using or distributing marijuana is still illegal under federal law, and that engaging in such conduct can result in discipline or federal prosecution. And, you know, I gotta say, if a lawyer doesn't know that pot is still illegal under federal law, I sure wouldn't want him representing me in any case or in any business. The court issued an order on Friday amending the rules, state rules of professional conduct to add a new warning about marijuana. As if we don't have enough warnings about marijuana over the last 80 years to begin with, here's a new one for them. And they say that because use, possession, and distribution of marijuana in any form still violates federal law, attorneys are advised that engaging in such conduct may result in federal prosecution and trigger discipline proceedings under SCR 111, of course SCR being Supreme Court rules, and that's what the amended rule reads. And so we had talked about this story a couple of times in previous shows where they were looking at this and there were testimony and everything. And what the Nevada Supreme Court, those wise justices up in Carson City have come up with is this idea to remind lawyers that pot is still illegal. Okay. You know, I'm glad to know that they're on the ball with that and that they're so concerned about their attorneys there. I just think that this is a case of wasted time in which the Nevada Supreme Court could have done other things. The Nevada Supreme Court for years has been asking for an intermediate appellate court in the state of Nevada, meaning that if you go to court, you're going to go to a local level. A county judge, a district, that sort of thing, a district court judge. And then if your case gets appealed for some reason, it goes right to the Nevada Supreme Court. And so for years, the Nevada Supreme Court has been saying, we need an intermediate appeals court between the trial and us because we have so much work to do. And I can understand how much work they have to do when they have to spend so much time and effort to tell lawyers that pot is still illegal. Can't make this stuff up. Okay. Also here in Las Vegas, speaking of our lawmakers and the official processes, in the Review Journal on February 10th, Sean Whaley writes an article entitled "Las Vegas Lawmaker Wants Blood Test to Check for Marijuana DUI." And it says that Assembly Chairman Steve Yeager, who is a Democrat here in Las Vegas, said Assembly Bill 135 is necessary because urine tests that check for marijuana metabolites are unreliable. Okay, let's skip the fact that for for years and years and years that employers have been using urine tests to determine marijuana use. Now they're not reliable enough for this Assembly Judiciary Chairman, and I know I know my co-host Perry is going to weigh in on this one as well. You know, he's saying that the levels of metabolite to determine impairment. This is Jaeger saying 2 nanograms per milliliter of delta 9 THC and 5 grams of 11 OH tetrahydrocannabinol would not change under the legislation. And so they're just saying that instead of just having a urine test for this, that they're going to bring this, and if they think you're under the influence, they're going to take you off the road from the traffic stop. They're going to either wait until an EMT gets there or take you to a hospital and forcibly draw your blood. This is just absurd. Now, no one wants impaired drivers on the road. Absolutely. And we'll put aside the studies from around the world showing that marijuana users, when they're under the influence, are actually more cautious than when they are not, because they're aware of their impairment. This bill specifies that the metabolites must be tested to determine impairment. So it's going to add more cost, which is going to go on to the defendant if they get charged, and on to the state if they don't. And I don't see this as doing anything positive for this. And I'm joined here in the studio with my co-host Perry Heitzschuh. And what do you think of this? We've got a Democratic lawmaker here in Nevada who now wants to pull people off the road and draw their blood to see if they've consumed something.
He's pushing a public safety issue that isn't about public safety, and he wants to get these. I don't want to say he's just like fishing for headlines, but I think there's a lot of legislators who legislate things that probably don't exist in the first place in order to get them to make
they
it
solve
seem like
problems that don't really exist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've seen this time and again, and when you look at it at face value, you're like, oh well, who could possibly vote against that when you're thinking about it? But then when you start to dig into it a little further, it turns out to be, like you said, it's a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah.
And if he's seriously concerned about impaired drivers being on Nevada's roads, then let's work together on a bill that'll actually solve this problem.
Absolutely true.
The Review Journal, and I forgot what other company is holding this, but they just announced a few hours ago they're holding a seminar or like a town hall meeting in a couple of days here on Thursday, on the 16th, to discuss Metro's use of these $2 drug test kits on the side of the road that have so often come up with false positives and have
caused hundreds of
false convictions.
False convictions, and then the vacation of that conviction.
Of course, and I think the idea is to bring this to a head before it. Not only is it imperative that we protect our fellow Americans' freedoms, which is supposedly what I was told when I was a kid is our most precious resource. You know, give me liberty or give me death, or anything of that kind of nature. But it's also, like you said, it's about protecting our tax dollars.
Yep.
And if we don't want to be held responsible for the back end of these lawsuits as taxpayers, we need to proactively deal with this to make sure that it doesn't become an issue. It's the same kind of thing for the marijuana DUIs. If it's going to cost more money and it's not going to keep people safe, I don't see the logic in it.
Yeah,
there are plenty of ways to determine if people are intoxicated before they get on the road. It's just a matter of making sure that the science is behind it beforehand. And like they said, 2 nanograms to determine intoxication, it's just nonsensical. I believe that this gentleman has most likely never consumed cannabis before and is trying to dictate legislation on cannabis as someone who's never used before, which so often we see.
Well, as we know, with a part-time legislature, we have citizen legislators here in this state who are not experts in these different fields, and they tell us that sometimes when they come down and see us, and so they want public input. So if you recall, a couple of weeks ago on the show when we had our friend State Senator Tick Segerblom on the show, he said the best way to get a hold of these people to change their minds and let them know your opinion is a brief phone call, polite, respectful, but a brief phone call. Emails work, that sort of thing. So in the interest of public service, I would like to give you Assemblyman Steve Jaeger's contact information so you can tell him yourself whether you think this is a good or a bad idea. And his email is steve.jaeger, that's YEAGER, at asm.state.nv.gov. WWDBTV.com, and you can send him a little email and attach whatever you think is relevant as far as supporting materials. His office is at 10120 West Flamingo Road, Suite 4162. And that's area code 89147 if you wanted to mail him a postcard or something. But as Tick said, the best way to do it is to give him a quick call. So why don't you reach out to Assemblyman Yeager at 702-281-5938 and let him know what you think about his idea to have police grab you off the side of the road and drag you to a hospital and draw your blood.
They already do. That's
Not
exactly what they do
necessarily.
now.
Well,
if they suspect you have a DUI, that's exactly what they do. They say, well, you know, we believe that you're intoxicated, so what we're going to do is they don't take you to a hospital, they take you to jail instead, and they forcibly draw the blood there instead, and then you have to retroactively defend yourself as to prove that you weren't intoxicated. Like, they'll take you to jail and put you through the process, and then you have to prove that you weren't, you know, that you're that you weren't guilty, which is kind of, you know, there is no innocence until proven guilty here. It's the exact opposite.
Yes, I would say though that someone who is quite drunk above the legal limit is very obviously intoxicated. And yes, they'll draw blood sometimes, but after they've arrested them because they've made the determination that they're intoxicated. Part of the problem with cannabis is that it's not always so easy to tell.
Of course,
you know,
which is
you
why
can
the
have
per
red
se
eyes,
limits
and
are
you can have dry mouth and this and that. But you can use a little Visine, you can chew a little gum, and all of a sudden those signs are away. So I think that what this bill would do, if it's passed into law, would wind up having a lot more people having their blood forcibly drawn and being caught up in this because the police don't have, according to them, they don't have another way to test this. Even though we talked on the program a couple of months back about a company that is developing an oral swab kit that does a quick oral swab and tells active metabolites.
Once
so
again,
this is
you know,
this is a bill that without a true need.
And look, I understand where Metro's coming from with that. There's this new law that they're being tasked to enforce, and they're not exactly sure how they're going to do it or what the legality of it is, or, you know, how they go forward. Are they just going to give everyone that smokes cannabis a pass because they don't know how to do it? Are they going to arrest everyone that smokes cannabis because, for the opposite reason? You know, this is going to become a problem. So it's worth looking into, but it's not worth hastily jumping into. Unfortunately, like you said, due to the nature of our legislature, there's a lot of pressure to get this done because there's such a limited amount of time. It's going to be hard to convince them to say, well, let's wait 2 more years. Well, that's not going to fly.
But the good thing about our part-time legislature is in the last several sessions they average about 1,000, 1,100 bills BDRs that come through. I think the last I looked on this, they were up in the 800s for this session so far. They don't have time to implement more than a quarter of them, let's say.
Well, of course, yeah, they just don't have it.
What the community needs to do is tell to tell these legislatures not to waste their time on this bill because this is a solution in search of a problem.
No doubt, that's a good way to put it, a solution in search of a problem. With that in mind, though, I wouldn't mind seeing some kind of swab or oral test as long as the science was there, you know, but how do we prove this science? Once again, like I was just saying about those drug test kits, those are nationwide industry standard, and they have been proven to be not so rock solid as the court system should demand.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of making sure that when we put our citizens under the weight of this, that it's correct. So I'm not exactly sure what the process is going to be to make sure that diligence is done.
I think that this one is not the solution, and if you agree with us, please go give Assemblyman Yeager a call and let him know politely, respectfully.
Yes,
of
exactly.
course.
That's the
We're going
key.
to take a real quick break, and then we'll be right back.
My name is Janine Evans, and I am the office manager at Getting Legal, and we help people get their medical marijuana cards. Anyone can be approved for a medical marijuana card as long as they have a pre-existing medical condition. The medical conditions recognized in Nevada include severe pain, severe nausea, muscle spasms, seizures, glaucoma, cancer, HIV or AIDS, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Our staff helps every patient determine before they come in for a visit whether or not they will qualify. We take care of the whole process of getting a medical marijuana card from the state of Nevada from start to finish. Our services include paperwork processing, a physician's visit, notary services. All of our patients pick up their approval letters right here in our office. We make it fast, simple, and easy. During your consultation, we will discuss different products available at the dispensaries, such as edibles, lotions, and concentrates. We will also discuss different ways to medicate, such as smoking or vaporizing. You will receive a separate identification card identifying you as a medical marijuana patient. This is used to enter the dispensaries and only to enter the dispensaries. Every veteran receives a discount off of the full price of their card. We also offer discounts to anyone working within the medical marijuana industry. All you need to do is call 702-979-9999 and a member of our friendly staff will help you schedule an appointment.
And welcome back to the show. We'd like to talk now about a few things that are going on in the region before moving on to other stuff. Up in Utah earlier this month, their House Health Human and Services Committee. Let me try that again. Up in Utah earlier this month, their House or Assembly Health and Human Services Committee unanimously passed House Bill 13, which allows research on medical marijuana. And, you know, it's nice to see progress being made in Utah, but don't you think there's been research done already on this?
Of course, for sure. It's just they're going to do what they're going to do.
Absolutely.
And, any progress is better than none. You know what I mean? I always thought that they would be one of the last dominoes to fall. And
Indeed.
it seems like there's more organized resistance within the LDS party than I originally anticipated. There are definite subsections of that culture who desire this medicine. And if you look at their dogma a little more objectively, cannabis fits right into their ideas of what medicine should be. It's natural, holistic, organic, you know, things like that. All the things that they look for. You know, they don't like caffeine, they don't like this or that, or taking drugs. So when you look at it and they say, well, we can grow this, it kind of fits in line with their
overall philosophy. Yeah.
In theory, if it would align a little bit, but it's all up to the leaders of the church to kind of see that alignment. So we'll see where it goes.
Of course. Well, their state representative Brad Daw, a Republican in this case, who's the bill's sponsor, said this is the first, in Utah, this is the first step in what I think is the right policy direction for the state. And, you know, I think it's good to see this movement, however slow it may be. And yet this ties in to what we're seeing in San Diego right now, where the city council allows recreational pot sales in medical shops. And Terry Best, who's the chapter chair of Americans for Safe Access in San Diego, told the Weed blog that the city council voted to grandfather in and write land use law give them business tax certifications for the holders in areas of manufacturing, cultivation, and testing. Deliveries will now need to be connected to a medical marijuana card clinic, conditional use permit only, and no standalones. So that means if somebody's going to be doing deliveries, they have to be tied with what we in this state call NMEs.
So they just said they're rolling over every medical marijuana place into a recreational, just kind of, they're just giving it to everyone? Is that what it said?
That's what it's looking like here.
Why couldn't we do that here and just simplify that process and just say, hey, we're just going to go ahead and just do it?
In part because, as Senator Siegelblum said when he was on the show a couple of weeks ago, the legislature is constrained on what they can change. Since it was a voter initiative that was passed, the legislature has to enact that initiative and can't substantially change it for at least 3 years. There are some changes that can happen. For example, the growing of plants, which I think is a constitutional issue where you're on that side of the line, I'm on this side of the line, so I can grow and you can't. That's just patently unfair. And if we can prove that that's unconstitutional, they can tweak that area. But overall, they have to stay within the guidelines of question 2. And so what I found interesting in San Diego, and tying it to Utah here, is their city council is now allowing recreational pot sales. Great. California voted for rec. But for years, San Diego was the main obstacle in Southern California for the medical marijuana industry. They zoned them out of existence. They condoned raids. They would cooperate with the federal government, and so now they're coming around here and finally saying, "Oh well, okay, we see you the people have overwhelmingly voted on this, so we better follow suit." And I'm glad that they're doing that. Terry Best from ASA said in the city council meeting after they passed this, "Oh, not too bad for a town full of loud prohibitionists," and that's the case in San Diego. It's been
Orange
called the
County is
Philadelphia of the West for
Orange County is
some.
very conservative also.
Yep.
You know, people are like, oh, you know, California is so liberal, and those liberals in California, you know, you hear that tagline barked out there a lot. But really, when you start to break it down municipality by municipality, there are whole different worlds within that Southern California area. Like Orange County and San Diego are vastly different than, you know, San Francisco and Los Angeles counties and even Riverside County and their zoning ordinances, especially concerning cannabis. We've seen this traditionally.
Yes.
So,
yes,
you know.
Absolutely. And so also happening in this region is in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and this comes to us from the Albuquerque Journal, written by Dan Boyd, and they have a bill to legalize marijuana, but it's stalling in committee. And here's interesting, you know, because we see this dynamic happening all around the country now. The Republicans have a unified government in Washington, and yet we're hearing that the Republicans may not be able to change the Affordable Care Act or pass a budget because the Tea Party segment of the Republicans is up in arms about this or that, and they don't want to do it, so they have a tough time getting a majority. So in New Mexico, despite a Democratic majority in both the legislative in both chambers of the New Mexico legislature, proposals to legalize and tax recreational marijuana use could be derailed due to dissent in the Democratic ranks. And I love this quote. "Morally, I just don't think it's the right thing to do," Senator Clemente Sanchez said in an interview. "I'll vote against it from the beginning." And now Sanchez is the chairman of the Senate Corporations and Transportation Committee, where the marijuana legalization bill would head if it's eventually approved in the judiciary. Now, what I've learned about state legislative politics over the last few years is that committee chairmen hold a lot of power, and if a committee chairman does not want a bill to get a hearing, he's not going to have that happen. If you recall the 2013 session, one of our legislators who was chairing a committee did not want 374 to advance through her committee, and she just held it aside, put it in a drawer, and
it took a lot to get that.
Yeah, mobilized a lot of people and other groups as well to get her to change that.
I remember the phone banking and all that crazy shit that we had to do.
Exactly. And so in New Mexico now, they're trying to move forward with what they think is the people's decision of general polling of legalizing cannabis, but you've got these people who just, I don't care if I'm elected to represent you. I'm going to do what I think, and I think that good people don't smoke marijuana.
Well, you learn about that in government class. You have two types of legislators. You have the legislators that are elected, and in their mind, they're elected to vote their conscience. Mm-hmm. And then they have legislators who are elected to represent their constituents. Some people say you're elected to represent on behalf of, it's you that they're electing, not themselves.
Right. They're electing you to make your judgment.
Yeah, not their judgment on their behalf. You know, so you have that push and pull, and there's no, unfortunately, that issue has never been brought up in the ideology of either party. That's a universal. Yeah, that's a universal sin that they all are guilty of.
Absolutely. One of the other senators in New Mexico, I've got to find out more about this guy. Senator Cisco McSorley, Democrat of Albuquerque, said legalization could increase New Mexico's profile as a tourist destination, particularly from Texans where recreational marijuana use is illegal. He said every eastern New Mexico border country will decry the devil of marijuana and then take every penny they can get. He said it would be come for horse racing, casinos, and cannabis. Well, if enacted, this bill calls for a 15% state excise tax to be levied, and then local governments can add on more. And this is really, we were saying for years, stop arresting us, tax us. And now boy, are they taxing us.
Yeah, careful what you wish for.
Yeah, very, very much so. And meanwhile, if we go back to Senator Sanchez here, he says he's not convinced the benefits of legalizing pot, including more tourism, would outweigh its potential costs, such as addiction treatment. And he said, I'm not sure that's the kind of tourism we want. We heard this before in Colorado. We heard this before in the state of Washington. We heard this during the campaign and in years past here in the state of Nevada. And it is just it is full of malarkey. This is ridiculous.
The last gasps of the prohibitionists.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I'm not sure we want those people spending their money in our economy.
We
would much rather them go to another state.
Yeah, after they just got done saying that they're damn well aware that those eastern counties will take advantage of it after, it's the same exact thing.
However, Cisco McSorley here, he's one of the good guys because he also has another bill that he introduced a couple of weeks ago, and it is a medical marijuana bill. It's in the New Mexico Senate Judiciary right now. And what this bill would do is give a blanket granting to all veterans for participation in the New Mexico medical marijuana program. And so that means any veteran, presumably that means someone separated from the service, would just fill out their paperwork and automatically be considered part of the state program and have legal protection even if they were not. And Senator McSorley's rationale behind this is many of the veterans who seek treatment, cannabinoid treatment, are there for PTSD, and because of so many other things having to do with mental illness, depression, those sort of illnesses, PTSD does have certain social stigmas attached to it. And so Senator McSorley is saying, rather than embarrass these people who've served our country, why don't we just let everybody who's served take advantage of this if they want, and that way nobody can say, oh well, you must be crazy or to have done this, or you must be suffering from depression. No, in this case, I'm a veteran. The law allows me, and I'm choosing to do that. So kudos to Senator Cisco McSorley of Albuquerque for taking an incredibly common sense view that I'm surprised nobody else came out with it before. But you go, guy.
So it's basically like a level of protection for the patients to where they don't really have to disclose what their qualifying condition may or may not be, because they already are pre-qualified under this bill.
They're pre-qualified, and so they don't have to have the stigma of
gives them a level of discretion that they seek.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Exactly. And,
yeah, I could get behind that here in Nevada.
I think that's a really good idea. And to close out our regional coverage at the moment, we have something from the Sacramento Bee, written by Taryn Luna is the reporter, and the article is entitled "California Seeks Advisors on Marijuana Rules." And this kind of reminds me of a story that I saw in Denver a couple of years back when they had legalization come through, and they started advertising for a weed reporter and a weed reviewer in some of their alternative weeklies. And so the article starts out and says that the Bureau of Medical Cannabis Regulation is now accepting applications for a marijuana advisory committee to help inform the agency as the state sets up rules governing the new industry. The state intends to create a single regulatory system for both medical and recreational use by the end of the year. That's really ambitious, too. The advisory committee will work with the Marijuana Bureau, Food, Agriculture, and Public Health departments to help develop regulations that protect health and public safety while ensuring a regulated market that helps reduce the illicit market for cannabis. Well, that's a mouthful. The Bureau expects the committee to consist of individuals from the cannabis industry, labor unions, public health, state and local agencies, among others. And Awet Kindane, the Director of Consumer Affairs, will select the members and oversee the committee. And this application procedure will be open for at least a month. So if any of our listeners who happen to live in California or spend a lot of their time there are interested, you definitely want to follow up on this. Get your input there. Be part of the change. Be part of the solution for this sort of thing. And get out to the Consumer Affairs, the State Consumer Affairs Division, and I'm sure there's something about it on their website. So take a look at that, and you never know, you can be part of the change. And with that, we'll be back in just a minute.
My name is Armin Imanijian. I work with Essence Cannabis Dispensaries. We have 3 dispensaries and they're all located in Las Vegas. We have the only dispensary on the Las Vegas Strip, which is located at 2307 Las Vegas Boulevard South on the corner of Sahara and Las Vegas Boulevard. I've been with Essence since Q1 of 2014. I'm the founder and one of the owners of the company. I've been involved in the marijuana industry just over 2 years. And my background is actually in gaming. I was Vice President of Casino Marketing and Vice President of Casino Operations at the Tropicana Hotel and Casino for 6 years on the Las Vegas Strip. The Strip dispensary is open from 10 a.m. to midnight 7 days a week. There's ample amount of parking just behind the dispensary. The way I classify Essence is not to be defined by a certain special or a certain promotion. We have specials on 4th of July, 7/10, 4/20, Labor Day, and they're very strong and very aggressive specials. We're really excited to put them out for patients. But that's not what defines us, and that's not what we want patients to come in for. We want patients to come in because we have the widest selection of the highest quality cannabis on the market at the fairest price with an unmatched experience. It's really important to us that we create an emotional connection with the patient, and that's what keeps them coming back.
And we're back with the rest of the Nevada Cannabis News Hour. We're going to jump right into a federal issue at this point. There is a new bill proposed to Congress that would supposedly end the federal war on marijuana. A bipartisan group of 7 Republicans and 6 Democrats have filed congressional legislation that would protect people who are acting in compliance with state marijuana laws from federal prosecution and punishment. The Respect State Marijuana Laws Act of 2017, the bill adds a new provision to the Controlled Substances Act. It reads, notwithstanding any other provisional law, the provisions of this subchapter related to marijuana shall not apply to any person acting in compliance with state laws relating to the production, possession, distribution, dispensation, administration, or delivery of marijuana. In a lengthy floor speech announcing the bill, chief sponsor, Representative Dana Rohrabacher, a Republican from California, argued that the legislation falls in line with the principles of limited government and states' rights that so many in his party profess to value. Now, gee, wouldn't that be nice if more Republicans really believed in individual liberty, except when they wanted to? That's just a wonderful thing to hear, and I like to hear him
and you
call
can
them out.
say the same thing about Democrats in the nanny state when they're over-regulating things that that they're just grabbing too much and really forcing people to do things that they otherwise wouldn't want to.
Well, it's funny because it's unfortunate that this particular gentleman kind of gets slopped in with the liberals because of his geographic location and the positions he takes sometimes. And the guy's not a liberal; he's a real Republican, in my opinion.
Absolutely, he's a staunch conservative.
Yeah, the guy toes the line, and I don't understand why this is so controversial. You know what I mean? This should be, Republicans should be proud to stand behind this guy and this bill. I mean, 6 of them are. I'm not saying that they aren't, but
yeah, but that's 6 out of 435. You know?
Well, I believe California has
55.
53. Is it 55 now? Good Lord, congressmen and women. So,
but they're not all on board. There are people. You know, if you look at California's a blue state certainly, but if you look, the blue areas really tend to be more along the coast, and the inland areas are the red areas of the state, and less populated, so there are, so the Democrats control the state by and large. But there are a number of Republicans there, and you're right, they should get on board something like this and co-sponsor them. I just love what Congressman Rohrabacher said.
Well, it's hard to ignore it. Basically, his quote says, "I happen to believe that the federal government shouldn't be locking up anyone for making a decision of what he or she should privately consume, whether that person is rich or poor, and we should never be giving people the excuse, especially federal authorities, that they have a right to stop people or intrude into their lives in order to prevent them and prevent others from smoking a weed, consuming something they personally want to consume." That's,
Poor Representative Rohrabacher. Too much common sense for this administration.
Too much common sense for Congress, period. You know, it's just one of these things. It's like someone said, they're like, oh, you know, we need a third political party. Well, someone said that we need a second one. You know, when you have both parties, you know, jumping lines on so many of these issues just when it feels convenient to them, you know, there is no stability in those arguments anymore. And that's why it's so nice to see someone kind of revert back to what I consider true Republican conservatism and really push this. And I
have
I
another
don't know
quote
whether
from later in the article that talks about that sort of thing.
Well, let's see here. Turning one marijuana stereotype on its head, he decried the federal government's, quote, paranoia regarding the truth about marijuana as evidenced by the DEA's longstanding efforts to block research on its medical benefits. He is quoted as saying, remember, as we discuss people's health care, Republicans over and over again say, you shouldn't get in between a doctor and his patient. We believe that it is the doctor-patient relationship. That is true from, if that is true for medical marijuana as well. Do we believe in these principles or not? It's really as simple. It's as simple as that. Do we believe in these principles or don't we? Not when it's convenient for us, or when the caucus takes a line because donations were made or something like that. You know.
And the thing is, what he said there on those principles, those core, fundamental, bedrock principles that Republicans are supposed to hold. This is beyond just marijuana. You're also talking about a person's determination over their own body, and this rolls right over into the matter of personal choices to whether you're going to have a kid or not, whether you're going to use birth control or whatever. These are things that should be between a doctor and a patient, and not having the government get in the middle of that.
It's just like, I feel like Republicans ignore the very dangerous precedents that they set without even realizing it, while holding to their misguided values. Example, the National Rifle Association had a golden opportunity to stand up for patients' rights last year when the one of the appellate courts of the Supreme Court said that medical marijuana patients were not allowed to own firearms. Where was the outcry from the right that a whole subsection of American society had been denied their Second Amendment rights? To hell with the marijuana thing. You just allowed the government to say that we can tell people who and who can't own firearms. They're fighting for mentally ill people to be able to, this or that.
I saw that.
But
just the other day.
marijuana patients, well, they get thrown under the bus, and they just say, well, we don't really care about you. That sets a dangerous precedent for them to open that door further. If they can ban medical marijuana patients from having guns, who else can they ban?
Right.
And it's the same kind of thing here. If we allow them to do what they want and say, oh, we can discriminate against you, what does that open the door for later on? They don't even realize what they're doing. Unfortunately, in an identical bill, in a nearly identical bill, Mr. Rohrabacher and others filed in the last Congress.
Didn't that anyway?
Well, it got
co-sponsors.
It got 20 plus co-sponsors, but never got a hearing. Because once again,
and the difference between then and now is now we have from the last election, four out of 5 states that were up for legalization passed it. 4 out of 4 that had medical passed it. And so now we have 29 states with medical laws, and we have 8 states with recreational laws. So what happens is in Congress that special interest group, that caucus, is only getting larger and larger. So it is going to happen in time. It's just for people who are sitting in jail, have had their lives ruined, it's not happening soon enough.
No, definitely not. And that's another issue we're going to have to discuss at a later date, is expunging these people's records.
Yes, absolutely. I'm all for that. Just before we move on this, I just want to say, you're talking about the Republicans not really honoring their core values. Much in the same way, you've seen this year, this past year, the Democratic Party lost a lot of their core supporters. The reason Donald Trump won the presidency is because the Democrats lost a lot of blue-collar, white working-class voters in middle America, and they just determined that the Democratic Party was not giving them what they want. In the same way, you look at the Tea Party and various other aspects of the Republican Party, they are proclaiming quite loudly they do not believe that the party is servicing their needs. So
they're not.
So there is a fracturing in the Democratic Party last year. I think now with unified government and being in control, the Republican Party is going to not fracture necessarily, but they're going to divide up into smaller groups, which will hobble the ability of the leadership to get the central Republican agenda through.
worse. I've always wondered why the Democratic Party never had just a full split. It shows me what good little soldiers they really are and how much they kind of care about each other in a way.
I think it's more the fact that in our system, you've only got two parties, and it's either us or them. And if them is the hated enemy, you can't go with them, so you're stuck with us.
Yeah, but
whichever side you're on.
I'm talking about more like a Tea Party style movement on the more liberal end of the Democrat side. After what happened to Sanders, where you had Hillary winning all these, or Sanders winning these votes, these states by popular vote, all the delegates are going to Hillary, and everyone clearing the field for her, and him getting thrown under the bus by the DNC and all this kind of stuff. Like what more would it take for them to say, enough of you, we're going to go with this guy over here, and whoever follows him follows him. Yeah. And you know what I mean? It's not all about Sanders. Well, I'm sure this is handed to.
I'm sure the party thought that Hillary had a lock on this thing, and shame on them. That's for sure. So anyway, they try these things year after year, and kudos to Dana Rohrabacher for doing this. But when it finally happens, it's going to be a surprise to everybody because it's been coming along year for year. For the past few years, we've had in Washington a rider on the appropriations bill which prevents the federal government from spending even $1 going after medical marijuana patients or providers in medical marijuana states. And so it took 5 years for that bill to be introduced year after year after year until finally it had enough votes to gain traction and Congress put a stop to it. And even though it's only a one-year rider, now for the past 3 years, Congress has renewed that every year and has prevented the DEA from coming in and raiding these places. So it takes time to get these things done in Washington, no doubt about it. What else is going on in the Republican Party and in since I don't venture into that side of the pond too much.
Well, supposedly, the title of this article is Why Republicans in Congress Are Suddenly at the Epicenter of Marijuana Reform. While the marijuana community, consumers, industry, and advocates alike eyes with trepidation the reign of avowed anti-pot Republican Jeff Sessions at the Justice Department, the executive branch of the Trump government is not the only game in town when it comes to making marijuana policy. Congress is back in session, and after the last November's legalization and medical marijuana victories at the polls, the pot state delegation is larger than ever, as you were describing earlier. At least some of those senators and Congress members representing the 28 states and, of course, the District of Columbia have gone and embraced medical marijuana, and the 8 states that have gone so far for adult legalization are gearing up to fight for pot law reform at the Capitol.
And the District of Columbia there as well.
Well, they have all kinds of issues because Congress
funds them.
Yeah,
yes.
well, that's
Congress
a bunch of nonsense. They're going to have to address that at some point. I can't even imagine how frustrating that must be, being a resident there and knowing that there's literally nothing you can do.
It's
a nascent congressional cannabis caucus formed in December is preparing a plethora of bills for the current session, and its members say they are optimistic about their chances, even in the time of Trump. With Republicans holding every committee chair in both houses, it's because Congress is riding the marijuana wave too, says caucus founder and co-chair Representative Earl Blumenauer from Oregon. The Congress is going to be a little bit better than last Congress, and last Congress was better than the one before that, he said in an interview with the Cannabis last week. It's very interesting watching the momentum build. The momentum is deriving from public opinion polls consistently showing nationwide majorities favoring legalization, and more importantly, the actual victories at the polls in November, where legalization went in 4 out of 5 for recreational, and marijuana went medical marijuana went 4 for 4. It's easier for people to embrace much of what we've done legislatively, he said now. And that's all true.
And what I'd like to point out from that story is that for the first time ever in this country, and without any fanfare, we now have a cannabis caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives. We have a group of legislators who are standing up and for patients, for citizens, and
it's
for
hard to
sanity.
believe that that's real.
Oh, it's
I remember
amazing.
I remember when MPP was like raising money for an office in D.C. And they're like, we need an office in D.C. so we can send a lobbyist to the Hill full time. And now we need to hire a lobbyist, and this is our guy, and And there was this whole, all these email blasts trying to raise money for all this stuff. And here we are now with the damn Cannabis Caucus on Capitol Hill, without outside funding, or like, this is them. And it's kind of just hard to believe how fast. Like, I'm just astonished at how fast this is all moving.
Yeah, finally. Back in 2010, I was one of the founding board members of the National Cannabis Industry Association, and at our first meeting in Denver, one of the first orders of business after getting organized was the hiring of an activist, of a lobbyist, I should say, and the renting of offices in Washington, D.C., so they could actively reach out to members of Congress and the Senate, because that's where the power is, that's where the decisions get made. And it's taken 6 years from them. ASA also had an office there, and it takes time to get these things done. And for somebody who's been charged or sitting in jail, that's a horrible excuse, but fortunately, we're moving forward with this, and I think this is a big step. So, anyway,
here's just a few of the bills that are being introduced by various legislators in Congress.
On the federal level.
House Resolution 331, filed by Representative Barbara Lee of California, the state's medical marijuana Rights Protection Act would block federal civil asset forfeiture aimed at the owners of state legal medical marijuana operators.
That's big.
Yeah, I don't know how much traction that's going to get, because Trump is kind of a fan of civil asset forfeiture. He's been quoted as saying recently. I'm not sure if he's just not fully educated on the law, or what the story is.
He's not fully educated on the law.
But it's just like, that's a really that's a bad one. When you can steal people's stuff without convicting them, that's really un-American in my opinion.
The Metro seized and forfeited both cash and property from me in a case where charges were dismissed, where there was no evidence and it didn't matter. And when I went to fight it in the fight the asset forfeiture in front of Judge Suzanne Johnson down at the Regional Justice Center, she just she refused to listen to my lawyer's arguments, refused to allow me to fire my lawyer and argue my own case, because the district attorney said that would put him at a disadvantage. And he's been doing this for almost 30 years. Okay. And they side with him. And that's it. And so, asset forfeiture is a huge problem in this country, and you see it
for profit.
You see it around the country a lot, where the state troopers will let the eastbound cars go, because they know those are the cars that would be carrying the drugs to the eastern cities, but they set up their checkpoints on the western side so they can catch the cash coming back, because it's not about stopping the drugs, it's all about getting the cash for their department, because some of these agencies can keep the entire amount of the seizure, and many of them can, all the proceeds of it. Others are in federal programs only get to keep 10%, so depending on the state, 60-80%, but there's a tremendous incentive for them to seize assets, and it's a horrible thing. It legalized theft. So,
here's bill number 714, filed by Representative Morgan Griffith of Virginia, Republican, for the Legitimate Use of Medical Marijuana Act, would move marijuana to the Controlled Substances Act Schedule 2, opening the door for more research and potentially doctors' ability to prescribe as opposed to recommend. It would also bar the use of that act or the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to interfere with the medical marijuana in states where it is legal. Sounds good at a glance, but I'm not so sure about moving it to Schedule 2. That might cause more problems than
I think Schedule 2 is a terrible mistake. From everything I've studied over the years in this, if you move it to Schedule 2, you are taking this industry and turning it over to the pharmaceutical industry.
Right, which is what we don't want.
Yeah, which is something we definitely don't want.
Let's see. Also filed by Representative Griffith, the Compassionate Access Act would reschedule marijuana, provide for its medical use under state laws, and remove CBD from the definition of marijuana. And then, of course, you have Senator Rohrabacher with the, you can't interfere with the state laws and things like that. So it's like there's just a whole bunch of good legislation that's kind of coming through the pipes. Well, some good, some not so good.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes. But I'm just really kind of anxious to see what Congress decides is worthy of hearing or not.
Indeed. And I was saying at before the start of the show, talking with our studio people here, and how much is happening in this industry and how quickly it's happening. For years, you would see no movement on this, and in the past several years, we seem to have a real groundswell. And I'd like to take just several minutes and just hit you with some headlines, because I have 3 pages of headlines, and this stuff is all less than a week old. So it's just amazing how quickly already things are changing. So I'll tell you what. You grab a page, I'll grab a page. I'm going to start. We're doing one at a time. Okay. We'll start. Maryland. Delegates introduced a constitutional amendment to legalize marijuana. Go Maryland.
Wisconsin's Attorney General is speaking out against the legislative proposals to legalize medical marijuana, saying it's a decision that should be left to the DEA.
Oh.
That's not so good.
That's not so good. But
here's one in Maine.
Yeah.
It says a new bill in Maine would require that applicants for marijuana business licenses have resided in the state for at least 1 year prior. Separately, the Legislative State Committee on Marijuana Legalization Implementation has started its work. They must be getting a flood of applications for them to try to put the clamps down on it like that.
And practically next door to Maine, in Vermont, their House Judiciary Committee will hold 3 days of hearings and discussions on a non-commercial marijuana legalization bill this week. So we're seeing a number of states are now legislatively moving into this area, or at least testing waters, like we just talked about New Mexico.
Here's something that I've always wondered why it didn't get traction faster. Tennessee lawmakers have introduced a bill to allow patients with out-of-state medical cannabis recommendations to legally possess their medicine in Tennessee.
Sure.
That's the first that I've heard since Nevada.
Yep.
That's taking it seriously.
Michigan allows it, but you're right. Many states do not, and it needs to be addressed, because you can carry any other medication across state lines.
And here's another one that says here's one to decriminalize possession of an ounce of marijuana in Tennessee. Meanwhile, officials are scrambling to reconcile decriminalization ordinances in Memphis and Nashville with the state attorney opinion saying that the local policies are illegal. Did you hear about all that? Memphis and Nashville city councils both said, look, we're going to decriminalize cannabis possession in our cities, and we're tired of having the police deal with it. Well, the state attorney general came out and said, well, you can't do that
because it's against state law.
It's against state law, and there's nothing you can do. So he's going to direct the state law enforcement agencies to go ahead and keep enforcing this. So they're setting up a push and pull between the locals and this one person who wants to utilize his will over the entire.
And to finish off Tennessee, there's another story here. We've got a headline of that their governor, Bill Haslam, says that he's keeping an open mind about pending medical marijuana legislation in Tennessee, but indicates he is sympathetic to concerns voiced by law enforcement. Those poor law enforcement guys who are not going to have easy overtime and low-hanging fruit if they can't arrest sick medical
once again,
marijuana
I would really take that seriously if there was an open dialogue between the patient community, the activist groups, the legislators, and the police. But it's always just the police and the legislators, and everyone else gets left out in the cold, and we have to pick up the pieces.
How true that is.
And that's not, if you're going to have a fair discussion, let's have a fair and balanced, as they call it on Fox News. Let's have a real fair and balanced discussion about this and come to some real conclusions. But that's never the case, or rarely the case, unfortunately.
So we mentioned earlier in the program New Mexico. We just mentioned Tennessee, and now a New Jersey senator is preparing to introduce a marijuana legislation bill. That's 3 states in a week.
Unbelievable.
It just blows your mind. An Indiana Senate committee approved a CBD medical cannabis bill. That'll bring us up now to 36 states, I think, that have CBD being allowed. It's just incredible what's going on. Minnesota House Deputy Minority Leader is introducing a marijuana legalization bill. That's 4, okay? A second bill would put the issue before voters as a constitutional amendment.
International even.
Yeah, international even. Right? We see Gibraltar, the Rock of Gibraltar, right, at the entrance to the Mediterranean. Their parliament is set to debate legalizing medical marijuana. And in Australia, a member of their parliament who quit his former party over its lack of support for broad medical cannabis reform began his first day in a new party by introducing legislation to allow patients to grow marijuana at home. Well, it's just, the rate of change is phenomenal. When between last week and this week, to have 4 state legislatures that we know of, and it could be more, that are introducing legalization bills.
This is outside of the voter initiatives. This is all them.
Yes, absolutely. And so we wanted to give you a quick look at all the stories we can't even cover because there's so much happening. There's so many resources out there for you, but please stick with us. We try to give you the best, the no spin and absolute truthful information on this, and we're going to continue to do this as long as we can.
Absolutely.
So,
there's a couple of quick events. We have a St. Fatty's Day party coming up on St. Patrick's Day at the Cannabis Chapel. That's Friday, March 17th. Come out and join us. Also, Weekend is going to have a booth at the High Times Cannabis Cup coming up in the first week of March. March. Please be sure to come out and see us. It's at the Paiute Tribal Reservation on I-15 North, I-15 exit 75. I-15 North exit. I'm not exactly sure what it is.
Is that the Valley of Fire?
No, it's not the Valley of Fire exit. That was just a damn commercial rolling in my head from a kid. You remember that commercial? But yeah, it's at the Paiute Tribal Plaza. And it's going to be a blast. First recreational cup we're going to have here in Vegas. Woo-hoo. And we also have our 420 party coming up in our pre-roll party, we're calling it, on the 15th,
We're going to have a slew of them.
So yeah, we'll keep you posted. And thank you guys for tuning in once again. And we will see you back here next week.